Russians have just finished voting for the new, or is it old, president. It is almost certain that Mr. Putin has got another presidential term. Our correspondent Nataliya Gumenyuk is in Moscow, so we are joined now by Nataliya Gumenyuk, and you've been there all day. Nataliya, what was the most striking thing that you've seen?
Just to explain to our audience, I'm in the election headquarters of Ksenia Sobchak, a popular TV presenter and an opposition politician who, according to the official data, has got not more than 1.69% of the votes. Yet she is probably the brightest of the candidates. Also, should say that Alexei Navalny wasn't allowed to run, and he asked for the boycott of these elections, while Vladimir Putin, of course, according to the recent polls, has up to 72% of the Russians who voted for him more than 6 years ago. But the main point was this: there is no doubt that this elections was without any competition. And even if you talk to the independent members of the observers campaign and independent members of the election commissions in Moscow, I'm talking to a lot of other people, there was no any doubt that Vladimir Putin would be the president. So the question was, so what? Why it should be? The main and the most important, what is striking, that there was no any political campaign running by the Kremlin. There was no any political economic message. Probably the conflict with Britain regarding the assassination of the Skripal, former intelligence, Russian intelligence officer, was the #1 topic by the last day. Yet the main story was about the turnout. A lot of people compared these elections, to the Soviet time, when the factories, the employees of different companies, especially of the state companies, were just called to come to the polls. I went to a number of the polling stations, and there were the food festivals. There was the different nice things when the people could get a ticket to a concert for the fact that they will show off. And that was the only Kremlin strategy, to make people to come. So far, or what we know after some just minutes after the close, an hour after the polls are closed, officially it's up to 65% of the people who had to come to vote. Yet it might be less more. So it's more or less guessing to what extent the government overdone. The Kremlin has really shown that this support is bigger than it is. What is interesting, that probably the biggest interesting story for me was really to talk to those independent observers and all kind of the activists who are still taking care about the fairness and transparency of this election. So their answer is actually that, yes, we know there is no choice, but we are trying to at least not to lose this institute of the elections, because there would be the mayor election, the municipal election, and at that time, at least the citizens would know how is it to vote, so that they wouldn't lose this practice.
Nataliya, how easy was it for you to access polling stations, and how they treat independent and foreign journalists at all?
If we speak about the work of the first of all, I also should add about some kind of a different types of the fraud which have taken place. Not that much in Moscow, but around the country. And we had really the cases when the ballots had been pushed like in mass. We have the knowledge of some kind of thing like what was named like the Sultanate of the elections, the regions like Chechnya, Ingushetia, Dagestan, where actually the turnout is extremely high. But I talked to the journalists who went there, and they agreed that most of the people indeed support Vladimir Putin. And I think the most popular discussion among the political analysts here and the journalists here is probably the confession of one of the spin doctors of the Kremlin, who said that since 1996, the government of Russia had used the only tactic to prove and to say, to argue that there is no any alternative. There is no any alternative to the current president, and it's already 22 years for how long that is happening. That this belief is still there. One thing to mention, that Ksenia Sobchak, whom you see right now, had started a political party, and she asked Alexei Navalny to join the kind of the constructive fight against the government, not boycotting it. They've been live on the YouTube channel, extremely popular by Alexei Navalny, who is an anti-corruption activist. And that was pretty nasty fight. He was very, I would say, really not nice to her, accusing her of being a puppet for just participating in this election. So the biggest discussion between Russia and opposition is really how to fight the system. Really, should we kind of be co-opted? Should we cooperate in some way using the liberal tools? Or should we just get out of the system? And that's probably where we can...
Nataliya, who of the candidates have already conceded the election? Who have already said, we lost, long live Mr. Putin?
I think that there is no even, that is the interesting part of this election, that the moment when usually people expect the result, nobody in fact cared who would win, because it was, even for the opposition candidate, kind of a usual thing. They are rather competing between themselves. Some would say like, okay, I know about one candidate, Surakin, whose name probably says nothing to a lot of people. He said like, oh, I don't have kind of a couple of percent, I have like 7 or 8. But the main thing is, in fact, just everybody confessed this election wasn't about the elected president. It's about like just showing that in this system where some of the candidates weren't allowed to run, in this system where the whole propaganda machine is supporting one candidate for years and years, they were participating for the excess, for the tribune, for the excess of the federal TV channels, for the at least an opportunity to speak against use this campaign for that. Because as I would remind, 72, it's more or less nothing against 2%. That's how big is the difference. Yet still it's worth it to watch, and it's still worth it to look at this, just to understand that indeed it's a bit of a stalemate. There would be 6 years of Vladimir Putin again, but of course there is some very, I think that there was a pretty gloomy mood in Moscow a couple of days ago. Today is still it's the end of the campaign, so people are happy it's over. In a couple of hours, Vladimir Putin probably would be near the Kremlin speaking in front of the crowd. That's what is expected, but that's not yet fully planned. So that's how it's running.
Thank you, Nataliya. Nataliya Gumenyuk of Hromadske was on our Skype connection with our studio in Kiev. And earlier she spoke to Roman Udot, co-chair of the board at Golos, a movement in defense of voters' rights in Russia. Let's take a look at what he had to say about the election day.
It's early hours yet to talk about fraud. Fraud is not that found easily. We still observe and have been observing since the beginning of the campaign inequality of the candidates. And when authorities remove popular alternative candidates, they have another problem, because democracy is a double-edged sword. When you play with the candidacies, with alternative candidacies, you are cut by low turnout and questionable legitimacy. So now the authorities are fighting for turnout. They organized, like it was in Soviet times, the cheap sellout of cheap products, entertainment, singing, dancing, whatever is possible in -11 on Moscow streets. And they are doing it to raise turnout, and they do it through the municipal factories, enterprises, through other means. They organize discount leaflets, at least I saw on the table in the polling commission, polling stations, leaflets with the discounts for whatever sort of services you like, just beauty salon, dentist services, any all way is used to do it to raise the turnout. That was a series of unpleasant surprises. First of all, we were attacked after we found that volunteers of the victory, Putin's volunteers, were paid actually by the government. And it's not allowed by the Russian law to campaign, to use during campaigning the paid work. If you are a worker, if you are a person, you can do it as a volunteer. But if you are legal entity, it's forbidden. It's forbidden. You should be paid in full, even on the market level. So in this case, the first crackdown on Golos happened after that finding. Then we showed in the presidential administration statistical data that was another problem for them. We were blamed like falsifiers, like charlatans, and so on. Recently, 2 our European partners were branded as unwanted organizations. It's a Russian way of saying banned organizations, and we are not under threat of the criminal punishment, are able to cooperate with them. And finally, when we were trying to find premises for this group of people, we found premises, several cases, several options, and after visits from the police department, one option after one option fell off. So this one was done exactly as it was described on TV. It was in clandestine spy style. When I switched off my phone, when I organized the legal interbank transaction without actual transaction, because the first premises were found by bank transaction. Sberbank is run by state, and so in this case they were on the next day after the payment they have found our spot.
All eyes have been on Russia this month, but the presidential election is not the only reason the country has been making headlines around the world. An assassination attempt on former Russian intelligence agent Sergei Skripal on British soil has triggered an escalating diplomatic crisis between Russia and the West. Earlier, Hromadske sat down with a Russian journalist and TV Rain anchor Mikhail Fishman to discuss both the election and the diplomatic tensions between Moscow and the United Kingdom.
I think that this upcoming election is specific from the point of view that it's the first election when Vladimir Putin doesn't have to fight. He has no one to struggle with anymore. He is already a total winner. And the question of power was the most important question for Vladimir Putin during his entire stay at the helm, starting from 2000. But at every single moment, his power, his authority was not absolute. There was still opposition. There was still oppositional elites around him. There was still he had to constrain media. He had to constrain governors, oligarchs. He was always fighting for his future on the top of Russian power structure. And now this fight is over. It's over for already, I would say, at least a couple of years. I'd say that he achieved this new status that he doesn't see any threat to his own ambition and to his own status. after Trump won the election in America, because he was really scared. That's my strong belief, that Hillary Clinton, if she would win the election, would build this united Western front, and he would still have to fight this joint and very powerful enemy. With Trump, it's not the case. And since then, he relaxed. This battle is over. And so this election is about nothing since then, because it only will sort of confirm this status quo in which Vladimir Putin is the one and only authority, absolutely unaccountable to any kind of force and absolutely unpredictable, with any kind of decision-making existing only in his head and nothing else. And that's this kind of new situation that we have for some time already, which will be confirmed this Sunday during the election with its predictable outcome.
And being very brief, so what what are the main issues for the Kremlin today, especially still speaking about the elections? As a Ukrainian, I would ask to what extent the war in Donbass, the Crimea, or even Syria is discussed, is considered. What are the things which are on the core of the campaign?
You're talking about what's the campaign's agenda?
Agenda.
I'd say it's most up to this, until this crisis with London, its most important, visible, and impressive point was this presentation during the so-called State of the Union address of Vladimir Putin, when he presented this new nuclear weaponry and arsenal. That's when we got finally what this sort of election, if it can be called an election, is about. The war in Syria was triumphantly ended again by Vladimir Putin in December, so it's over, and it's perceived in Russia as a great success, for sure. Ukraine is not really something that is part of this campaign or some part of political agenda. It's not a campaign, it's a political agenda that is being built before our eyes, but it's not, I believe, totally connected to the election. Well, of course, yes, there are these goals and tasks of turnout and votes delivered from Vladimir Putin, but Vladimir Putin himself and his aides, they think about something else. They think about what they're gonna do, and it's not connected to this election, not so ever.
For the full version of this interview, as well as for other pieces of our extensive coverage of Russian elections, go to our website and you'll see that 24/7 we deliver latest news, not only from around the world, but from specific countries as well. And we'll be back in this studio in a sec.